Okay, Chapter 9, Grandpa Joe Takes a Gamble. The next day, when Charlie came home from school and went in to see his grandparents, he found that only Grandpa Joe was awake. The other three were all snoring loudly. "Shh," whispered Grandpa Joe, and he beckoned Charlie to come closer. Charlie tiptoed over and stood beside the bed. The old man gave Charlie a sly grin, and then he started rummaging under his pillow with one hand. And when the hand came out again, there was an ancient leather purse clutched in the fingers. He whispered, giggling a bit. "You do know we don't have a hope, don't you?" Grandpa Joe. "There is just that tiny chance that it might be the one, don't you agree?" "Yes," Charlie said, "of course. Why don't you open it, Grandpa?" "All in good time, my boy, all in good time. Which end do you think I ought to open first?" "The corner." "The one furthest from you. Just tear it off a tiny bit, but not quite enough for us to see everything." "Like what?" said the old man. "Yes, now a little bit more. You finish it," said Grandpa Joe. "I'm too nervous." "No, Grandpa, you must do it yourself." "Very well then, here he goes." He tore off the wrapper side of the whole thing, and they burst into peals of laughter. What the heck's going on?" cried Grandpa Josephine, waking up suddenly. "Nothing," says Grandpa Joe. "You go on back to sleep."
Chapter 10, The Family Begins to Starve. During the next 2 weeks, the weather turned very cold. First came the snow. It began very suddenly one morning, just as Charlie Bucket was getting dressed for school. Standing by evening, it lay 4 feet deep around the tiny house, and Mr. Bucket had to dig a path from the front door to the road. After the snow, there came a freezing gale that blew for days and days without stopping. And oh, how bitter cold it was. Everything that Charlie touched seemed to be made of ice, and each time he stepped outside the door, the wind was like a knife on his cheek. Inside the house, little jets of freezing air came rushing in through the sides of the windows and under the doors, and there was no place to go to escape them. The 4 old ones lay silent and huddled in their beds, trying to keep the cold out of their bones. The excitement over the golden ticket had long since been forgotten. Nobody in the family gave a thought now to anything except the 2 vital problems of keeping warm and trying to get enough to eat. There was something about very cold weather that gives one an enormous appetite. Most of us find ourselves beginning to crave rich steaming stews and hot apple pies and all kinds of delicious warming dishes. And because we are all a great deal luckier than we even realize, we usually get what we want, or near enough. But Charlie Bucket never got what he wanted because the family couldn't afford it. and as the weather went on and on, he became ravenous and desperately hungry. Both bars of candy, and the birthday one and the one Grandpa Joe had bought, had long since been nibbled away, and all he got now were those thin cabbage meals 3 times a day. Then all at once, the meals became even thinner. The reason for this was that the toothpaste factory, the place where Mr. Bucket works, suddenly went bust and had to close down. Quickly, Mr. Bucket tried to get another job, but he had no luck. In the end, the only way in which he managed to earn a few pennies was by shoveling snow in the streets. But it wasn't enough to even buy a quarter of the food that 7 people needed. The situation refuses to take any of ours. I've heard his mother tried to slip her his own piece of bread on the plate at breakfast this morning, but he wouldn't touch it. He made her take it back. He's a fine little fellow, said Grandpa George. He deserves better than this. The cruel weather went on, and every day Charlie Bucket grew thinner and thinner. It seemed doubtful whether he could go on much longer like this without becoming dangerously ill. And now, very calmly, with that curious wisdom that seems to so often come to small children in times of hardship, he began to make little changes here and there in some of the things that he did, so as to save his strength. In the morning, he left the house 10 minutes earlier so that he could walk slowly to school. Exhaustion. Then one afternoon, walking back home with the icy wind in his face and incidentally feeling hungrier than he had ever felt before, his eye had caught suddenly by a piece of paper that was lying in the gutter in the snow. The paper was the greenish color, and there was something vaguely familiar about it. Charlie stepped off the curb and bent down to examine it. Part of it was buried under the snow, but he saw at once what it was. It was a dollar bill. Quickly, he looked around. On the sidewalk, their chins sunk down in the collar of their coats, their feet crunching in the snow. None of them was searching for any money. None of them were taking the slightest notice of the small boy crouching in the gutter. Then it was his, this dollar? Could he have it? Carefully pulled it out from under the snow. It was damp and dirty. and began moving towards the nearest shop. It was only 10 paces away. It was a newspaper and stationery store, the kind that sells almost everything, including candy and cigars. And what he would do, he whispered quickly to himself, he would buy one luscious bar of candy and eat it all up, every bit of it, right then and there. And the rest of the money he would take straight back home and give to his mother.